Hello, I'm Dr. Andrea Dawson. I'm the professor of violin and viola at MTSU. Today I'd like to help you prepare for the ninth and 10th grade violin mid-state audition. We will be looking at practice strategies for the excerpt from Vivaldi Concerto number 23 in G major. Remember, success is all about practicing correctly. Let's look at some ways to get you on track to play your best audition. The first thing I would like to look at is some of my fingering suggestions in this excerpt. So if you've looked at it, you probably figured out, well, I could technically do most of it in first position until I get to measure 14, at which point I have to shift up to third position, and then I can get back down. That's true. I want to look at a few places where not playing in third position might be a better idea near the beginning as well. So our first example is the first line. It's true that you can play this all in first position, but we have fourth fingers, and we do want to be able to vibrate our fourth finger, but maybe that's not our best option. So I recommend playing this first four measures in third position. And even like that measure in third position with the fourth finger. And then I shift down to first position there. So you can play it in first position. It's a personal preference. I don't know, you can figure out how to play it in, no, second position doesn't work very well. You can go up on the D string. I mean, there's options, but I think the most straightforward option that's not in first position would be third position for 4 bars. On line 2, we could play this in first position in measure 7. But boy, I do not recommend first finger trill on an open A. That's never very beautiful. And so this in particular would sound so much more beautiful in third position. Well, that's nice, but we have to figure out how to get there. One option is to start measure 7 in third position. And that's quite possible. Or we can shift up. Either of those options is going to require practicing, so you might want to try both of them before you choose one. Definitely after the downbeat, we're going to shift back to first position. Then the whole passage that we get up through measure 13, so measure 8 through 13, first position works great. There's lots of string crossings. Open strings are fine. Use open strings wisely, so when they make sense, then use the open string. There's a lot of them. The next shift that we have to look at is going to be in measure 14, getting into 15. The most obvious place for that is going to be the third note of measure 14 is where I would do it. If you find a different place, you're welcome to it. Although I'm not really sure what that would be, but you can do what works for you, but I'm going to talk about this shift. And then we have to get back down again. I see 2 options for shifting back to first position. One is at the end of measure 15, and the other is in the second beat of measure 16. In which case I would probably opt for a lot of fourth fingers on the way down. If we instead shift in the last bar, the second to last bar, it sounds like that. I think either of these shifts works fine. When we go to practice the shifts, the process is the same for either one, so I'll just pick one and choose that one. But we'll take a look at that in just a minute. So those are my fingering suggestions. Let's take a look at tuning. And so obviously you're going to tune your violin very, very carefully. I hopefully don't have to say anything about that. Make sure your strings sound perfect together because you want to give yourself a fighting chance. We're going to look at finger patterns in G major. So you know your finger patterns in first position. We have a half step between 2 and 3, a half step on the G, and on the D string, half step between 1 and 2 on the A string, half step between Oh, I wrote that very strangely. I'm so sorry. That's supposed to say 1 and 2 on the E string. Half step between 1 and 2 on the E string. I don't know why there's a 3 and 4 there, but third position, we do have to figure out all whole steps on the G string, 3/4 half step on the A string, and on the D string, and then 2/3 on the E string. It's useful for us to just kind of evaluate that before we start. So playing a scale is good, but we want to figure out, what if I'm in this position? What if I'm in this position? Really get those finger patterns down. So that's a good thing to practice. Next, we're going to look at ringing tones. So once I know where my half steps are, I'm going to want to play everything beautifully in tune with my open strings. But first, I'm aware of the idea that the notes that have the same name as an open string should ring with that string. So without even tuning that G to my G string, I can hear that it's in tune because it rings after. Same with the A. And then in first position, whoops, that rings, and so does that. And I want to listen for those notes very carefully as I'm playing the passage. Then furthermore, you can tune each of those notes to an open string. Octave on the first note, unison. On the second note, 10th. Nice consonant interval with the G string on the B. Unison E. Octave D. Unison A to an open on the E. Octave D. And then a third with the A. And then a 10th or a major third with the G. And then E. Leaving the trill out, the F sharp. And that's a good way to start making sure that our notes are really, really in tune on that first line. On measures 9 and 10, we have, it's actually 9 and 11, we have this chord, which is a D major minor 7th chord, or a dominant 7th chord, in the key of G, of course. 5/7 is D major minor 7, with a major third, and C natural minor 7th. And this passage, when we play fast, tends to be a little out of tune if we're not paying attention to where the high and low 2s are. So high. We can make sure that's in tune with the A. Low 2. Check with the E string. Ringing tone, ringing tone, ringing tone. Low 2. Low, high, low, high, low. Right. Measure 4 and 5. We are going to look at a way to practice the shift here. We're practicing shifting from that third position that I recommended, right? Back to the E, to feel really confident about that. So I'm going to practice. Shifting with my third finger from the B down to the G, which would be my first position note with the third finger. And I'm just going to practice doing that really in tune with my G string. Remembering that shifting has to be an arm motion and not a finger, wrist, thumb, weird motion. So then I find my E before putting it together and making that measurement. I'm measuring the motion that my arm makes on the way back down to first position. And I'm remembering that so that instead of doing weird things that are hard to remember, I'm making a nice clean motion with that. So that's a good way to practice that shift. Now let's look at some of our other shifts. Measure 7, we are shifting up. Maybe. We're maybe shifting up on the second beat if we decide to do that fingering. So I'm looking at this shift. Shifting from F sharp to G, I'm going to use the second finger again to get to the third position. I'm trying to show you that my arm is doing all the work there and my finger's just along for the ride. So I practice with the guide finger first. Before slurring them together smoothly. And then I have the option for the other shift, getting from G in measure 6 to practice that shift instead if you like. Shifting up in measure 14, this is one we can't avoid. You've got to figure out how to play that D. Probably you've practiced your shifting up to third, but if we want to do it cleanly, let's look at how to do that. So here's an exercise to help us with that. Again, we're going to use our guide fingers. Shifting with the second finger, we're going to, that's the pattern we're going for eventually. So I'm using the finger before the shift to get me into the new position. Second finger on G is before the shift. I use that to get to third position. Then I do it faster. And then I can slowly. It's not a terrible idea to practice this under a slur. You can hear if you've got any extra mess to get rid of in that. Okay, then we got to third position. We also have to practice getting down. As I said before, these shifts work the same way. So on the top line, this is if we shift in measure 15 on the beat 4. I'll show you that, but it's the same if you shift in the other place. So we practice from B, shift with 1, then we speed that up. And then I do it with the bowing, kind of half tempo before, right? And you have to just practice the timing so that we don't hear anything extra in there. We want it to be smooth. The shift has to be fast, but it also has to be relaxed. So make sure you're lightening up your left hand fingers during the shift and not squeezing. That little bit of lightness as we're shifting will help it sound clean. Alrighty. So that's shifting. Now, what else? We want to make sure that our sound is beautiful. And so we have to look at what we're doing with the bow, because of course that's where the sound is. Perpendicular and parallel, those are the words of the day. So first, parallel. What's parallel? The strings have to be parallel to the ground. So if you imagine putting a marble on your G and your D string, if it stays up, your imaginary marble stays on the string without super glue, then your strings are parallel to the ground. But if it rolls off the end of your violin, then it is not. And maybe if you're not sure, then get an actual marble and try it. So parallel to the ground. The bow needs to be perpendicular to the string and also parallel to the bridge, right? This even a little bit off from that is not going to sound as good. Then we want to make sure we're on a good contact point. For the piano at the beginning, maybe just in the middle of the string, right? So not on the fingerboard, we'll talk about that in a second. Not on the fingerboard, that's not going to sound beautiful, but not too close to the bridge either. And then for piano, not too much weight. For forte, a bit more weight or leaning into the index finger, not squeezing or pinching, but leaning. And then we are going to use the correct bow speed depending on what we're doing. For the 16th notes, it's got to be just the right amount, too little. Obviously doesn't sound good. Neither does too much. So, And again, I'm going to change the angle of my camera. Sorry, 1 second there. So you can see my arm, right? So that we have a kind of a free motion with our forearm for the détaché. We're going to use the middle of the bow for the passage work, but we're going to look at using the whole bow at the beginning. So even for the piano. Sorry. Now, you want to make sure that you're in the middle of the bow when you get to that passage. So we have to do some bow planning in that. So if I let myself, then the beginning of my passage is going to sound messy. So I need to get to the frog. Let me get my music back up here. Start at the frog. Don't use a lot of bow. Frog. Middle. Then it's easier to make that transition, right? So bow placement matters. Tempo for this is 120. That's our good goal tempo. You can do anything in the tempo range that they gave you, but I'm using 120. And when I first start this, I'm going to practice all of it with the 8th note, so half tempo, which you might think, well, that makes a lot of sense for the 16th notes, but what about the beginning? Well, if I want to have better bow control, I'm going to play the opening slower. 3 and 4 and 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 4, and really important to connect that so you see how it's related. I would definitely do that with the metronome at half tempo. Very important. The other thing to think about as we're practicing the opening is how do we get the first note, right? That's not pretty. That's not pretty. So I want to have a good contact point. I want to start with my bow touching the string, but not grabbing the string. That's grabbing. So just tickling the string. And then I'm going to add a little bit of weight right as soon as I start. But because we're piano, we're not going to add a lot of weight. Now, you might say, well, it's piano, so we should be on the fingerboard. That's not really a beautiful concerto sound, though. So I think we need to have enough contact for a beautiful sound, not just a soft sound. So soft and beautiful. Is where I would play that, kind of more in the middle of the bow, middle of the string, slightly behind the middle, with fast, light bow and a lot of nice vibrato. And then we can get to the frog in measure 7, so that we're in the middle in measure 8. All right. So to recap, when we want good tone for the 16th notes, we're going to be in the middle of the bow. We're going to be in the middle of the string. We're going to use a bit of weight. We're going to make sure that we're using enough of our hair, maybe all of it, not too heavy. So we just need to, me that's a good combination of everything. Too heavy, too much bow, too little bow, right? Too light, too close to the bridge, too close to the fingerboard. So everything has to be just right. Okay, so practice that bow stroke until you find that, because that's what we want to hear. Having good posture is also going to help that. Let's talk a little bit about dynamics and musicality. There's a few places in this where things repeat, and it would be interesting if we did something other than the nothing that's written. So this fast passage there are no dynamics written, but we assume it's kind of maybe forte or mezzo forte. Then those two measures basically repeat here. So is the first one more or is the second one more? We have to make a decision because I think playing them the same doesn't make a lot of sense. Here we get a crescendo, right? And then maybe save some to get all the way to there. I don't think that measure 8 is supposed to still be piano. At least it's not when in the concerto, the actual concerto. So I think we're supposed to crescendo in measure 7 to measure 8, but to make us the crescendo in measure 12 really work, maybe coming back in measure 10 makes some sense so that we have room to go for the crescendo after that. So do consider adding more dynamics than what are on the page instead of doing less dynamics than what are on the page. Good. At the very end, it does go down, right, in 15 to the end. So you might think, oh, it's a good place for decrescendo. I wouldn't do that. I think it's supposed to end strong. You want to feel like that your ending is flashy so the judges will be impressed. Or just because it sounds good, too. Now, everybody always asks me, how do I practice my fast passage work? What if I can play it at half tempo or quarter tempo, or half tempo, let's say, but I can't get it any faster than that? So we're going to talk about 3 methods that I'd like to use to getting your passages faster. After you've practiced them slowly and they're very clean and even at that tempo, now we're going to try to play them faster. And this requires the use of your metronome. The first exercise we're going to do is what I call 4-3-2-1. Not a very clever title, but it makes sense. We're using our metronome. Our goal tempo is 120, so I'm putting my metronome on 120, and I'm going to start by playing 4 notes, 4 of each note. And we're going to start with doing 1 measure at a time. I would not try to apply this to a whole passage until you fix all the things that are going on in 1 measure first. They do repeat, so that helps. I'm selecting, which measure did I decide to select? I'm going to select measure 12. Yeah, I think that's a good one. So we're going to do 4 of each note in measure 12. I always go to the next downbeat. And I'll do that a few times until I'm satisfied the tone is good, my string crossings are clean, my fingers are changing at the right time. But for the purposes of time now, we're going to go from our 4 to our 3. To get to 3, you need to divide by 3 and multiply by 4. So 120 divided by 3 is 40, multiply it by 4 is 160. And so 160 is going to be our tempo to practice our triplets. This is, I think, the most useful thing to practice because it really challenges our left and right hand coordination without making the notes too fast. So our bow is moving at the same speed that it was before, but now we're going to have to change the notes a little faster. Triplet, triplet. 1, 2, here we go. Notice I always start with my bow on the string. At the last minute maybe, but from the string. 2, ready, go. And triplets are great because you have to focus on the up bows and the down bows, and it makes them more even. All right, so practice that until you can do it very cleanly. Then we go back to our original tempo, which in this case is 120, and we're going to do the 2 part of the 4-3-2-1. And now this will be basically we're playing the notes at half tempo while the bow is moving at tempo. So it'll end up being 2 notes per beat, but 4 bows per beat. It sounds like this. Okay, do that enough times until you're satisfied that it sounds clean. If you want an extra challenge, or even if you don't, try it. Try that same exercise starting up bow. It's tricky. Let's see if I can do it. Ready? Right? It's always good to challenge our left hand, right hand coordination. All right, let's say I've done that several times. I'm satisfied you even worked on that up bow one and managed to do it. Now I'm going to try doing it up to tempo. That's the one. One is like the one note, one bow per note, original tempo. Now understand that we're just seeing if we made progress. You may still make a mistake in this measure, and that's okay, because there's always tomorrow, assuming you're not waiting to the last minute. Don't do that. But let's test my 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, false start. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Okay, notice what I did. I counted in my head. I had my left hand and my right hand prepared. 2, so left hand prepared. 1, 2, set, breathe. Very good habit to get into, which gets us to the whole concept of how do we start. Practice starting the piece or the excerpt. Practice starting any piece that you play or excerpt or audition music, because when you're nervous, it feels really different starting than when it does in the practice room. So give yourself a script. Here's my tempo. I'm thinking of the beginning. All right, I'm thinking of my tempo. I find my first note with my left hand, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to count 1, 2, on 3, I will set my bow, and on 4, I will breathe. It looks like this. 1, 2, I did it wrong. 1, 2, right? And so if I just practice that as a process, I need to do that a lot of times, so that when I get in the room, I'm like shaking and can't remember what I'm doing, and then I have a script to make that more successful. I recommend that. So some other ways to practice passage work, looking at the same measure, still with the metronome. I'm going to do that measure 12 again with dotted rhythm. So we have, and we can practice that one. We have to do the reverse. Right? And there are other rhythms too. We can do mixed up ones. There's a lot of them, but even just doing the first two is useful. The other exercise that I would recommend is what I call clumping, and that is to play in your goal tempo, one beat at a time, very fast. And so when I say one beat, though, I mean one beat plus the first note of the next beat. So 5 notes total in this case. It sounds like this is measure 12 again. We repeat that as many times as we need to, listening to good clean string crossings, shifts if there are any, etc. Bow on the string. Next beat. Always breathing. Next beat. Next beat. Maybe open A. And then I do 2 beats. And then I start on the second beat. And then I start on the third beat. Then I try the whole measure. Right? Now I'm not playing the whole passage. I'm fixing one measure at a time, and that's really key because we can focus on that much. And once that measure is solid, you can start to work on the other measures and then put groups of measures together. We're not talking about the day before the audition. Hopefully you've got another month to go, but that's the idea. I hope that some of the things that we've talked about in this video are helpful to you in preparing for your audition. If you have any questions about any of this, please feel free to email me at andrea.dawson@mtsu.edu. Enjoy your practicing, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.